They ignored me for years. But when the college dean asked, "Is she your daughter?" they froze like they'd seen a ghost. It happened at the awards banquet, a formal event with white tablecloths, polished speeches, and name cards on every table. Mine said Eliza M. My parents' cards were there too, though I knew they only came because my brother had a friend on the guest list, not because of me. Dean Harrison took the stage to announce the university's most prestigious student honor, one reserved for academic excellence, leadership, and impact. I didn't expect him to say my name. I was used to applause that didn't include me. Praise that stopped just short of where I stood. But he did say it. This year's honoree built 3 student programs, maintained a 4.0 GPA, and mentored over 100 incoming students. Eliza Monroe, please come forward. The room clapped. I stood. And my parents didn't. They looked stunned, confused even, like someone had mistaken me for someone else. And that's when Dean Harrison turned to them, smiled politely, and asked, "Is she your daughter?" It wasn't a rhetorical question, it was a spotlight, a quiet reckoning. Meredith blinked, then forced a nod. Victor gave a tight smile, the kind you give when you're trying to remember someone's name. They didn't clap. They didn't stand. They just sat there, watching a version of me they'd never bothered to know. I walked to the stage in silence, not nervous, not proud, just numb. Because all the noise in my head, the years of trying to be seen, the begging, the shrinking, had gone quiet. For the first time, it wasn't me asking to be recognized. It was someone else demanding it for me. That moment didn't fix everything, but it changed something. Not for them, for me. I realized the applause I had craved wasn't theirs. It never had to be. I had built something without their hands, without their eyes, without their help. After the event, they left without a word. Not even a congrats. I watched their car drive off, taillights fading like a habit I was finally done chasing. And as I held the plaque in my hands, all I could think was, so this is what being enough feels like, even if it's not for them. I used to think if I just worked harder, they'd notice. If I got straight A's, won awards, stayed out of trouble, maybe then they'd look at me the way they looked at Cole. But it never worked. No matter what I did, I was always the background. Growing up, the walls of our house were filled with Cole's trophies. Soccer, debate, even participation ribbons. My side of the hallway was blank. Once I taped up a science fair certificate I got in middle school. It disappeared by the end of the week. No one said a word. Cole didn't even try. He skipped homework, talked back, failed classes. Still, Meredith called him her little genius. Victor said he was going places. I once won a regional writing competition, first place out of hundreds, and they told me not to brag. Our dinners were quiet unless they were talking about Cole, his teachers, his sports, his plans. If I spoke up, the air would shift. Meredith would glance down at her plate. Victor would change the subject. Cole would smirk, like he knew the script by heart. I always ended up eating in silence. I learned to stop talking. Not just at dinner, everywhere. I became good at making myself small. I stayed late at school, joined clubs, volunteered, anything to fill the space they refused to share with me. I didn't want to be their pride anymore. I just didn't want to be forgotten. By the time I applied for college, I didn't even tell them which schools. I filled out applications during lunch breaks and study hall. When I got the acceptance letter from Oak Ridge University, I left it on the kitchen table. No one mentioned it. They didn't help me move, didn't buy me sheets or send a card. Victor said, "We're not doing the whole dramatic goodbye thing." Meredith said, "Just don't screw this up." Cole didn't say anything. I left with 2 suitcases and a ride from my friend Ava's dad. And once I got there, surrounded by people who didn't know the version of me that had to apologize for existing, I started to breathe for the first time. I joined orientation teams. I applied for scholarships. I kept my head down, but my work started speaking louder than I ever had. I didn't go home that first year. I didn't think they'd notice, and honestly, they didn't. No calls, no visits. Just an occasional forwarded bill or insurance reminder from Meredith. Like I was still just paperwork in her life, not a person. But in the quiet I'd been shoved into, I started to build something mine, something real. The red flags weren't just there. They were framed, celebrated, baked into every routine. Like when Meredith would plan a birthday party for Cole months in advance, but forget mine until the night before. One year she handed me a grocery store cupcake and said, "At least I remembered." Victor only talked about college when it came to Cole. "We'll get you into somewhere good," he said, scrolling through football rankings. When I mentioned I was thinking of majoring in social work, he scoffed. "What are you going to do? Talk people into being less poor?" Cole once got caught plagiarizing a term paper in high school. Victor met with the principal and smoothed it over. I got an A- once, and Meredith asked, "What did you miss?" It wasn't concern, it was critique. Like I was an underwhelming investment. When I got the call for the dean's honor list my sophomore year, I forwarded the email to our family group chat. No one responded. 2 days later, Cole posted a photo of his new tattoo, and they both commented immediately. Meredith said, "So proud." Victor replied, "Looking sharp, son." Even when I came home for a brief weekend, my first time in over a year, nothing had changed. My old room had been turned into extra storage. They made up a mattress in the den. Meredith said, "Well, you're hardly here anymore." As if that had been my choice. I asked Cole once if it ever bothered him, the difference in how they treated us. He shrugged. "You always made things complicated. They just, easy." That stayed with me. Easy. That's all they wanted. And I was never easy because I asked to be seen. At school, I won a campus leadership award. It came with a small scholarship and a plaque. I mailed them a copy of the photo from the ceremony. Meredith texted, "Try not to get cocky. College isn't the real world." Victor said nothing. When Cole got arrested for a DUI during his first year of college, they drove overnight to pick him up. When I was in the hospital with a stress-induced panic attack, I had to Uber myself back to campus after being discharged. Meredith said later, "You always overreact to things." Eventually, I stopped sharing wins. I stopped inviting them. I stopped hoping. But the ache didn't stop. Because no matter how independent I became, I still wanted to matter to the people who were supposed to love me first. And that's the thing about red flags. They don't scream. They whisper, slowly eroding the part of you that believes you're worthy of being claimed. The banquet was supposed to be about celebration, recognition. A chance to be seen not as the girl who disappeared into silence, but as someone who had built something worth clapping for. I didn't invite my parents. The school did. When I saw their names on the guest list, I assumed it was a mistake. But no, they had RSVP'd. I told myself maybe something had changed. Maybe hearing my name on the program would spark something real. Maybe this time they'd finally see me. They arrived late. Meredith in pearls, Victor in his usual navy suit. Cole wasn't with them. I said hello. Meredith said, "You look tired." Victor asked where the bar was. They sat 2 tables away, never once glancing toward mine. When Dean Harrison began his speech, I held my breath. He listed accomplishments I had forgotten I'd even achieved. Things I did not to impress, but to survive. When he said my name, the room applauded. Everyone but them. Then came the question, the pause, the polite tilt of his head toward their table. "Are you her parents?" It wasn't confrontational, just genuine curiosity. But their faces, cold, unreadable, betrayed a truth no one had dared name out loud. Meredith smiled thinly. "Yes," she said, like the word tasted bitter. Victor just nodded, not meeting anyone's eyes. It was the same look I'd seen my entire life, the one that said we don't really claim her, but we can't deny her either. After the event, they didn't say goodbye. They left during dessert. I watched their coats disappear down the hallway like ghosts retreating from a haunting. I stood in the lobby, plaque in hand, surrounded by congratulations from strangers. The people who should have been proud were already gone. A faculty member asked if I was okay. I smiled. I'm used to it, I said. And I was. But something cracked that night. Not because I was hurt, but because I was finally done hoping. You can't be abandoned by people who never truly held you. But you can still feel the cold of the absence. And that night, their absence became permanent because when they refused to see me in a room that saw everything I had become, they lost the right to be part of my story. I didn't go to class the next day, or the day after. I turned off my phone, ignored emails, and curled up under the blanket I had brought from home freshman year, the one thing from that house that had ever made me feel safe. The plaque from the banquet sat on my desk, still in its gift bag. I couldn't bring myself to hang it. Not because I didn't deserve it, but because I didn't want to see it and remember who hadn't clapped. Success, without their pride, still felt unfinished. I didn't cry at first. I just went still, like my body shut down to keep from short-circuiting. Friends texted, knocked, offered food. I said I was fine. I wasn't. But I couldn't explain the kind of grief that comes from being erased in front of a room full of people. What broke me wasn't that they left early. It was that I still wanted them to stay. That even after everything, the birthdays, the hospital, the silence, part of me still craved their approval like air. And that realization humiliated me more than anything they'd ever said. I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I never sent. You missed it. All of it. Not just the banquet, but the girl I became. And I stopped needing you long before I stopped hoping. I folded it, tucked it in the back of my journal, and let myself grieve. Ava stopped by and didn't ask questions. She just sat on the floor with me, eating crackers and talking about nothing. She said, "You don't have to be strong every day. You were strong for too long. That's the real problem." I didn't respond, but I held her hand tighter than I meant to. Eventually, I started moving again. One class, one errand, one load of laundry. Not because I felt better, but because motion was the only thing that kept the ache from sinking deeper. I wasn't okay, but I was breathing. Late one night, I opened my inbox and found an email from Dean Harrison. Short, kind. You earned that award. Not for being noticed, but for being undeniable. Your story is just beginning, Eliza. Let them catch up, or don't. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it. Taped it above my desk where the plaque was supposed to go. Because sometimes you don't need applause. You just need one person to remind you you're real. And sometimes that one person has to be you. It started with a voicemail from a name I hadn't heard in years. Aunt Denise, my mom's estranged sister. "I saw the photo from your banquet," she said. "I didn't know you were doing so well. They never talk about you, you know." She called again the next day. This time I picked up. Her voice was careful, but warm. "Your parents always treated you like a burden. I saw it at Christmases, birthdays. I stopped coming when it became too painful to watch." I sat in silence, heart pounding. Denise told me stories I had forgotten. How I used to hide behind the couch during family parties. How I clung to her arm whenever she came over. How I'd quietly ask, "Why doesn't Mom smile at me the way she does with Cole?" "They always wanted a second boy," she said gently. "Your mom told me once, after a few glasses of wine, that having a daughter felt like starting over. Like she had to prove something. That was never your fault, Eliza." Those words broke something open, not in anger, but in clarity. For so long I thought I wasn't enough, but I was never the problem. I was just the reminder that they couldn't mold me into who they wanted. I went back through my old photos, journals, report cards, traced the pattern I had ignored. My achievements were always quiet, uncelebrated, but they were there, steady, resilient, undeniable. I realized I had built a life from scraps and somehow made it whole. I spoke with a former neighbor, Ms. Clarice, who used to babysit us. She said, "You were the one who cleaned up after Cole, who helped me carry groceries when your parents didn't bother." She remembered. Someone had noticed even then. That weekend, I started compiling everything, not for confrontation, but for closure. I gathered letters, certificates, photos, notes from professors. Proof that I had existed, even when my own parents pretended I didn't. I wasn't erasing them. I was removing their power to define me. I sent a package to Dean Harrison. Not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. I included a letter that said, "You asked if I was their daughter. I was, but I've since decided to be mine instead." And for the first time, the truth didn't ache. It anchored me. It happened during the alumni gala. I had been asked to speak, a short address about leadership and resilience. I almost said no. But then I thought of every time I had been asked to shrink, to disappear. This time, I wanted to stand up. The event was larger than the banquet. Professors, donors, former students, and my name was printed right there on the program. Eliza Monroe, Class of 2024, Keynote. I wore the suit I bought with scholarship money. I looked like the person they refused to see. Halfway through the event, I noticed them, Meredith and Victor, sitting in the back, not on the guest list, probably invited by someone else, or just attending because of Cole's old ties. This time, I didn't flinch. I just kept breathing. When I took the stage, the lights were hot, but my voice didn't shake. I told the truth about coming from silence, about building alone, about how success doesn't need an audience to be real. I didn't name them. I didn't have to. The room understood. At the end, Dean Harrison returned to the podium. He thanked me. Then he paused, looked at the crowd, and said, "When Eliza graduates, this university will not just be proud. It will be better because of her." The applause was immediate, full, honest. I saw Meredith shift uncomfortably. Victor's jaw clenched, but they stayed seated. No clapping, no eye contact. Just like always, frozen when faced with who I really was. But this time, I wasn't, waiting for their hands. After the speech, people approached me. A professor offered me a graduate research position. A donor handed me her card. A woman from the dean's office said, "We want your story in the next alumni magazine." For once, I wasn't being tolerated. I was being invited. That night, I got an email from Meredith. Just 4 words. "You looked very professional. No apology, no pride, just surface-level control." I didn't respond. I archived it. That was my closure. Not her words, but my refusal to need them. Because the justice wasn't about punishing them. It was about living beyond their reach. And being seen, truly seen, by the world they once told me I'd never belong to. And when I walked out of that gala, head high, the only name that mattered was the one I built for myself. I moved into my own apartment after graduation. Small, with peeling paint in the hallway and a kitchen that needed work. But it was mine. Every corner held proof that I had built a life without asking anyone's permission to exist. I framed my Aishwarya plaque, hung it over my desk next to the email from Dean Harrison. Not for show, for grounding. On days I doubted myself, I looked at them and remembered. I was never invisible. Just unclaimed by people who lacked the courage to love me right. My friends helped me celebrate in ways my parents never had. Ava threw a graduation dinner with fairy lights and homemade pasta. They clapped so loud, the neighbors knocked. I cried. In the bathroom, but this time it was from being overwhelmed by kindness, not emptiness. I started working at the university as a program coordinator. Students came to me with the same shaky questions I used to ask in silence. What if I'm not good enough? I always smiled and said, "You already are. The rest is just proof." I didn't block my parents. I didn't need to. They faded, on their own. Occasionally, I'd get a forwarded message or a vague attempt at reconnection. But I didn't answer. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I had made peace with their absence, long before they noticed mine. One afternoon, a student asked me who inspired me most. I paused, then said, "The girl I used to be, the one who kept going, even when no one clapped." They nodded like they understood. And I think they did. I published an essay under my name. It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory. about choosing to believe in your own story when no one else does. It went viral. But what mattered more were the messages. This is my life too. I thought I was the only one. I wasn't famous, I wasn't rich, but I was free. Free from chasing approval. Free from dimming myself to fit in a picture I was never meant to be in. And that freedom, quiet, sturdy, real, was everything I thought love would feel like. Sometimes, I drive past my old neighborhood. I don't stop. I don't need to. That house never held me anyway. It just held the beginning of the girl who would one day walk away and never apologize for shining. Because when the world finally asked, "Is she your daughter?" and they hesitated, that's when I realized I've always belonged to myself.